How long would they be able to survive in these lands if they continued to act the way they did? But that's the serious stuff out of the way. I was going to be nice and obtain this golden aurora accumulation modus operandi for you. But your nature has made me curious, as I want to see more of a display of your abilities. If you wish to keep your head start against other underdwellers, you'll need to begin accumulating Havenly Aurora as soon as possible, as why don't you enter the challenger arena of this archipelago? If you can win against other challengers, you can obtain more units of Havenly Aurora and gain the capability to springboard your power as you haven't seen anything yet. Her words were valiant as the apex aeonic earth saber smilodons around this area pulsed with power. The feline visage of the Haven Saber Smilodon rose with a yawn and a stretch as a heavy hyperversal extremity authority of dissolution erupted around her, covering the Smilodons here, in addition to Noah, as with a devilish glint in her eyes she echoed out, "Let's go!" With a glimmer of light, the Smilodons here turned into obsidian shadows that were taken deeper into this extensive Havenly archipelago, towards a challenger arena that was on all such floating land masses to designate a place for battle. The vein rift that held the Havenly Smilodon lineage was a rowdy one, as two temporal fields of dissolution pulsed with radiance at this moment. The challenger for the temporal field with extremity blue had entered after the purposeful delay, with time passing as nobody came out from any temporal field. That is until SAA! Flickers of light erupted from a certain temporal field as two auras were spat out. The Tier 3 hyperversal extremity Smilodon known as Zaman, innumerable wounds stretching across his body, and the visage of extremity blue was utterly gory as half of her body was missing. Flesh, brain matter, and skeletal structure were wiggling and trying to reform, the scene being utterly shocking for a Tier 3 hyperversal extremity who held something as unique as hyperversal hockey of extremity. And yet, she laughed gloriously. 8,699 units of Heavenly Aurora? What is this? How do I use it? She spoke shocking words as Zaman turned his head towards the cold and apathetic Lord Commander Smilodon and bowed down respectfully before he turned into a flicker of light back into the obsidian mist. But the words of Extremity Blue showed she had actually won, as how exactly had she pulled it off? As her musculature wriggled and tried to reform, the Lord Commander Smilodon gazed at her coldly while voicing out, "You have come out victorious and gained entry into the supernal haven of dissolution. Be mindful of your actions within, as if you offend those you should not. Your life is not guaranteed." The same words that were said to Noah. The same words applied to even powerful Tier 3 hyperversal extremities. Extremity Blue's laugh faded at such words, as it seemed like clarity returned to her, with her body beginning to float towards the obsidian mist in the distance, as outside the vein rift, many beings began to clamor. The first hyperversal extremity to gain entry into the unknown lands. And she seemed to be on a hunt, as many wondered what would become of the destiny of the first underdweller to have entered the unknown lands within the extremity vein. Nobody stopped her anymore, as with a flicker of light, Extremity Blue disappeared into the obsidian mist. What many didn't know was just how precious of a gain she had gotten from defeating a Tier 3 hyperscopic extremity Heavenly beasts. 8,699 units of Havenly Aurora. Tier 3 hyperversal extremity celestial creatures were immeasurably more powerful than one at the apex aeonic lifeform level that Noah had defeated. Their means of obtaining units of heavenly radiance were many, as the number Extremity Blue had attained was that much greater. Within moments, space warped around her as she very soon found herself in a grand space filled with the dense authority of dissolution. Streams of authority of other havens also flowed serenely, as massive floating islands with their edges flowing with authority in the form of waterfalls could be seen. The moment Extremity Blue arrived, many wills focused on her. Her eyes were sour as she sensed over a dozen hyperversal extremities locking onto her, with her eyes being drawn over to the floating island directly ahead of her that held Smilodons. She gazed at its peak with the phenomenon of a spinning singularity washing down a treasured light, as well as the auras of circular bubbles holding treasures of extremity. She began to float towards it with interest as her aura spread out, her voice echoing out to the Smilodons on the island before. You all wouldn't have happened to see a cute young man pass through here before me, would you? Dark hair, fair skin like a newborn's, and confident eyes bordering on arrogance and superiority over all others. He's my weak little hubby that needs to be protected. She spoke with a smile towards the Earth Saber Smilodons cultivating below, their eyes opening to gaze at her vibrant aura of a Tier 3 hyperscopic extremity, as they only blinked calmly before they went back to their business. Chapter 26-24, Heavenly Aurora. 5. They actually ignored a Tier 3 hyperversal extremity. Extremity Blue was astonished at this, but she nodded soon after, as she continued to feel the gazes of multiple hyperversal extremities on her. Strength was king, and the Smilodons down below knew it. If she went on a rampage here, it was hard to say what the result would be. As for now, she continued forward. She warped to instantly appear near the dense bubbles of halos of light on the skies of the floating landmass, her authority overtaken by the abundant aeonic treasures of extremity, floating calmly without anyone taking them, as when she reached out towards Own of the more radiant light. You have sufficient units of Heavenly Aurora to obtain the entry albatross of the authority of Destro-y-her. Would you like to obtain it in exchange for 1,000 units of Heavenly Aurora? Her eyes flickered with brilliance. Entry albatross of the authority of dissolution. Something that would actually allow her to truly embark on the concept of dissolution that relates to the very Haven itself. Something that made the Haven Saber Smilodon she fought nearly injure her gravely. Her eyes flickered as her will instantly went forth, feeling the streams of authority within her reduced by 1,000 units, as the bubble of light around an entirely obsidian pulsing singularity faded as it was quickly absorbed into her body. She closed her eyes as within a few nanoseconds, a weak but profound authority of dissolution erupted around her body. Ha! Her eyes curved into a devilish smile as their blue radiance hungrily went on all the dazzling halos of light next to her. This was supposed to be the culmination step of extremity sanctification that apex aeonic lifeforms reigned in under the eyes of the underdwellers of the 7 aeonic havens. And yet, there seemed to be boundless opportunities for hyperversal extremities. Extremity Blue gazed at the wonders around her as more information flowed into her mind. You have sufficient units of Heavenly Aurora to obtain the Golden Extremity Panacea of Dissolution. Would you like to obtain it in exchange for 100 units of Heavenly Aurora? You have sufficient units of Heavenly Aurora to obtain the Golden Aurora Accumulation Modus Operandi. Would you like to obtain it in exchange for 100 units of Heavenly Aurora? You have sufficient units of Heavenly Aurora to obtain the fragment of an armament of extremity. Would you like to obtain it in exchange for 1,000 units of Heavenly Aurora? Many possibilities rose before her eyes as they were things to aid one in traversing the layers of dissolution and even fragments of armaments of extremity. Her bright eyes shone with destiny as she instantly spent another 100 units of Heavenly Aurora to obtain the Golden Aurora Accumulation Modus Operandi, her actions revealing a shocking truth in the future to come. Those with more power existences who had already achieved extremity would only have a larger starting point, as their power would be getting a major boost once they started going through the Heavenly Archipelagos and accumulated units of Heavenly Aurora. They would further reform their power, as the heights they couldn't scale before would become possible for them now. Extremity Blue felt the fantastical modus operandi flow into her mind as she learned a great deal about Heavenly Aurora. Her smile becoming even wider as before she could do anything else, she felt rousing movements below her. Towards the center of the floating island, she could see massive stellar black trees surrounding a circular platform meant for battle. The auras of Smilodons could be seen all around the branches of the thick trees as they bellowed out loudly, seemingly cheering on a finished battle, as an obsidian cherry-colored Smilodon with a flaming black crown overpowered another Earth Saber Smilodon. The phenomenon drew her attention as she instantly warped over to this location, her blazing aura drawing some eyes as the voice of a hyperversal extremity thundered out from above the tallest tree. And another victory for the challenger. Truly marvelous. Any others to accept his challenge? He should have reached over 100 units of Havenly Aurora now, as it's enough to buy a Havenly treasure, helpful in even crossing the boundary layers of dissolution. The focus was egging others on as it favored battles, the figure of Extremity Blue arriving here with a smile and observing everything as even more truths of these new lands unveiled themselves. She wanted to quickly begin searching for the one known as Osmont, this being likely already having run far away from this entry location, as searching for him would be a great pain. So she thought of familiarizing herself with these new lands first, as after she arrived in the massive clearing, showing a grand arena below her, built from obsidian crystalline material, pulsing with dissolution, she voiced out. Over 100 units of Havenly Aurora? I just spent some as I can refill them now. She spoke brilliantly while gazing at the Earthsaber Smilodon with a flaming crown who had just won the battle. And the Tier 1 Hyperversal Extremity Smilodon who had just been speaking, sneered towards her as she let out a sharp reply. Fuck off to another challenger arena that has Tier 3 Hyperversal Extremities waiting. Why would you want to bully an Apex Smilodon just for 100 points, Underdweller? A Tier 1 Hyperversal Extremity spoke towards a Tier 3 Hyperversal Extremity like so. It was enough to cause Extremity Blue to flash with a deadly light as her smile became even more gorgeous and deadly. My oh my, the natives of this land don't seem to have an ounce of respect towards those more powerful. The Earthsaber Smilodons that hadn't even reached Extremity paid her no heed. And now this Tier 1 Hyperversal Extremity even told her to fuck off, in front of thousands of Apex Smilodons, and while the auras of other Hyperversal Extremity watching the surroundings too. In response to her words, the Tier 1 Hyperversal Extremity Smilodon yawned her reply while stretching her body. Respect goes both ways. If you act like a dumb bitch, I'll treat you like a dumb bitch. You just won against Brother Zaman to gain entry as you're seriously injured, and he is recuperating in his domain on this very same Havenly Smilodon archipelago. Sister Sepia, with the same power as you, is also on this archipelago, with other Tier 3 Hyperversal Extremity Havenly beasts occupying the Titanoboa archipelagos and the Dragonfly archipelagos nearby. If underdwellers like you want to begin acting rowdy as soon as you arrive, well, I can only tell you to fuck around and find out. The words were of utmost disrespect. It was such a shocking reality that Extremity Blue had never faced before, as when ascertaining its truth, she could only laugh. These new lands are so very interesting. All right, then can I take this challenger arena and see if any of the Tier 3 Hyperversal Extremities you mentioned would want to battle? Her eyes still radiated wonder. She could see the shocking importance of Havenly Aurora as she wanted more of it as quickly as possible. She needed to ascertain how much she could acquire with the Golden Aurora accumulation modus operandi, but it seemed like the path to obtaining Havenly Aurora quickly lay on fighting and obtaining it from others. And yet, towards her words, the paws of the Tier 1 Hyperversal Extremity Smilodon waved dismissively. This arena is currently taking battles for Apex Aeonic lifeforms. Go to the Titanoboa archipelagos or Dragonfly archipelagos. Maybe they will want to entertain you. Or just proceed deeper into this supernal haven of dissolution, and you'll come across Obsidian and Crimson archipelagos where hyperversal extremities fighting is a norm. Extremity Blue was once again rebuffed. She smiled dangerously as she locked her eyes with the speaking Havensaber Smilodon, not saying anything else before she moved away from this location. She thought of many things as she also thought about how the current situation would soon change when more beings like her entered these lands. If someone like the Adjudicator of Dissolution were to enter and there was nothing stopping her from acting against her. With this thought, and many more in mind, Extremity Blue passed over the skies of the Havenly Smilodon archipelago and obtained a few more radiant halos of light before she turned into a streak of blue light that shot into the distance, heading even deeper into the supernal haven of dissolution. Back in the Havenly Smilodon archipelago she just left, the Havensaber Smilodon gazed towards Noah's figure on the Challenger arena below as she sent a mental message. What did you do to have such a spiteful woman chasing after you, Noah had only shown goodwill as wondrously, Extremity Blue appeared right before him without knowing it was him standing before her eyes. And the Haven Saber Smilodon, nor any other Smilodons, paid heed to Extremity Blue. Noah got off the Challenger arena after battling multiple Apex Smilodons who rose to take his challenge, shaking his head towards the Haven Saber Smilodon in reply, as his eyes were gazing at the halos of treasured light above. He had attained enough units of Havenly Aurora to acquire some things. Chapter 26-25, Shocking the Havenly Smilodon Archipelago. 1. Through his quality as an absolute hyperversal inscrutable existence, he expressed tendrils of dissolution outwardly, as his visage of Smilodon moved across space to float towards the halos of blinding light. Below him, the visage of the female Havenly Smilodon who had given him an introduction and even sent away Excelward. Extremity Blue watched silently as a moment later, the aura of another Haven Saber Smilodon appeared beside her. Little Sister Leda, why are you busying yourself with this Underdweller's business? The voice stemmed from a Tier 2 hyperversal extremity stronger than Leda, and yet she harumphed towards him while replying. I'm not boring like you, Senior Brother Kyle, and anyone who can veil themselves from my eyes like he is. There has to be something special. If I hadn't seen him change right before me, I wouldn't be able to tell him apart from any other Smilodon. Imagine if such a being reached Zenith Tier 3, or even crossed the threshold beyond it. Just how much fun and chaos could such a being cause? I just wanted to observe him to see if I can peel his layers of uniqueness, as him utilizing the Golden Aurora accumulation modus operandi for the first time will reveal a bit about his soul and foundation. Lyda's pulsing could already see Noah's figure appear in front of another Golden Aurora accumulation modus operandi, surrounded by a halo of Havenly authority. Beside her, her senior brother shook his head indifferently as he gazed at tens of thousands of Smilodons across the Havenly Smilodon archipelago, who were currently practicing the same Golden Aurora accumulation modus operandi and attracting thin streams of the Havenly authority, intermixed with the authority of the supernal havens themselves, as they would slowly become units of Havenly Aurora. He spoke dismissively when he thought about the newcomer Underdweller. Havenly beasts that were born within the supernal havens themselves and baptized by the Havenly authority can barely accumulate 5 to 10 units of Havenly Aurora daily when they first begin. The Underdwellers who have the most minuscule traces of Havenly authority within their existence will maybe be able to accumulate half of that, if not less. Asking for any surprises from a being such as this may be expecting too much. He stated the harsh truth and reality, as all incoming Underdwellers would come to find how harsh the conditions were in these lands, unless they already had sufficient power. The first Underdweller to arrive may as well discover first, as they watched Noah perceptively. In the skies, Noah reached the blinding halo of light holding another black and white scroll, as a different message appeared before his eyes. You have sufficient units of Havenly Aurora to obtain the Golden Aurora accumulation modus operandi. Would you like to obtain it in exchange for 100 units of Havenly Aurora? 121 units of Havenly Aurora. This was how much he was able to obtain after taking down 3 Apex Aeonic Smilodons in the Challenger arena. All 3 held the 16th boundary layer of dissolution as their highest, with their power being something the current Noah could easily overcome, as he didn't go wild in battle, yet. He would see how many units of Havenly Aurora could be accumulated with the modus operandi before him, as if his ongoing theories proved to be true. A blinding light shone in front of him as he felt the halo of light disappear, and 100 thin streams of authority left his soul at the same time as the moment the exchange was completed. The scroll turned into a glimmer of light that vanished into Noah's head, and this glimmer of light turned into waves of information. A unique tool granted to any being within the supernal havens of extremity, as it isn't just a method of operation, but a key that allows the birth and growth of a Havenly organ that is capable of isolating and drawing in minuscule concentrations of Havenly hyperversal authority, while also mixing it with the authority of the supernal havens of extremity the being is currently in. The circulation method of operating the Havenly organ and growing it to be capable of accumulating even more units of Havenly Aurora faster is as follows. A grand method of circulation showed itself as the moment that the golden aurora accumulation modus operandi entered Noah's soul. A small minuscule singularity was born near his heart, the beginnings of a heavenly organ. As Noah read its description, he couldn't help but speculate one more, as the so-called heavenly hyperversal authority he could see above the heavenly Smilodon archipelago, and the other archipelagos truly seemed like a form of Vitalis hyperversal authority. And the mixing of Vitalis hyperversal authority, along with the authority of the supernal havens of extremity, seemed to give birth to the astounding treasures floating serenely atop these floating islands. What would happen if Noah tried to utilize a method of accumulating units of heavenly aurora with his body? With his existence that held innate Vitalis hyperversal meridians that had genuine Vitalis hyperversal authority flowing within? Let's find out. His soul was calm as while floating in the skies, he began to follow the golden aurora accumulation modus operandi. The barely formed heavenly organ near his heart that was only a minuscule singularity began to spin. Around him, barely discernible thin streams of heavenly authority began to materialize and draw towards him, becoming mixed with the authority of the supernal haven around before it was drawn towards the heavenly organ within Noah's body. And before his eyes, 0.01 units of heavenly aurora have been accumulated. A small number rose. In the distance, the figure of the heavenly Smilodon Leda and hyperversal extremity Kyle observed as the former tilted her head while the latter nodded as if it was to be expected. You at times expect too many things from others. Leda, hyperversal extremity Kyle had only just begun to speak when his words stopped. The barely visible streams of heavenly authority and authority of dissolution being drawn above Noah stopped at this moment. And Noah's body throbbed as the action of drawing in units of heavenly aurora through the heavenly organ for the first time caused this organ to be formed as a part of Noah truly at this time. And the moment this occurred, the calm and lustrous meridians within his body came to life. His aspects of existence that were filled with pure and extremely powerful Vitalis hyperversal authority came to life. Chapter 26. Shocking the heavenly Smilodon archipelago. 2. His body, his soul, his origin, his innate Vitalis hyperversal meridians. He couldn't actively control this authority even though he had undergone the first Vitalis awakening. But at this moment, a natural reaction occurred, as the heavenly organ that was drawing in lesser forms of Vitalis hyperversal authority and mixing it with the authority of dissolution to create units of heavenly aurora. It felt the shockingly pure Vitalis hyperversal authority spread across Noah's body as a quintessential change occurred. Since the heavenly organ was drawing in minuscule streams of heavenly authority, the Vitalis hyperversal authority within Noah's aspects of existence and innate Vitalis hyperversal meridians surged and instantly flowed towards the heavenly organ. But the organ also needed to draw the authority of dissolution to ultimately form heavenly aurora. And at this moment, it had begun to receive extremely pure heavenly authority from the body it was in. It needed extremely pure authority of dissolution to balance this out and begin forming units of heavenly aurora. As if it could not obtain such pure authority, it would have to at the very least replace this with enough volume. And so, the skies above the heavenly Smilodon archipelago buzzed. As if his body was a conduit, tendrils of the authority of dissolution began to draw from nearby reality en masse, as within a nanosecond. A swirling storm of dissolution had already gathered above. It was dissolution, along with ant streams of authority of the other supernal havens of extremity that were naturally in the surroundings. It gathered at a shockingly high speed, as even more of it continued to come from the surroundings, creating an inverted obsidian mountain of authority that had its sharpest point sinking into the visage of a single being. Boom! An eruption of authority erupted as large volumes of the authority of dissolution entered Noah's body and went straight into the heavenly organ that had shockingly pure Vitalis hyperversal authority flowing in. The organ rotating like a strained engine to very quickly fuse these authorities together. And the product of all this was a glorious one as prompts rapidly began to flash before Noah's eyes. 100 units of heavenly aurora have been accumulated. 100 units of heavenly aurora have been accumulated. 100 units of heavenly aurora have been accumulated. Prompt after prompt, wave after wave. Streams of heavenly aurora began to form en masse as the small heavenly organ within Noah's body began to expand. And it had to do this, otherwise it would be destroyed from the sheer volumes and purity of authority it had to fuse together. And at this point, as Noah's body released pure vitalis hyperversal authority automatically into the heavenly organ, they began to feel the natural dwindling and usage of this authority as his innate vitalis hyperversal meridians pulsed. They bellowed out with tyranny and majesty as an instant later, what the heavenly beasts considered heavenly authority. The authority that was gathering above the archipelagos, pure transparent streams of it, mixed with a gorgeous white, began to be drawn towards Noah until a rising transparent white storm formed below his body. An inverted obsidian mountain of the authority of dissolution and other supernal havens of extremity above, and a transparent white mountain storm of heavenly authority below. They all rushed into one being's body in a phenomenon of utter incredulity. The eyes of hyperversal extremities. Leda and Kyle opening their eyes wide in shock as on the massive heavenly Smilodon archipelago, the few more powerful hyperversal extremities began to rouse, along with the wills of extremities from the faraway Titanoboa and Dragonfly archipelagos. All of these eyes and wills were directed to a single existence, an existence that continued to experience rows of prompts thundering over his eyes amidst this glorious show of quintessence. 200 units of heavenly aurora have been accumulated. Light's 100 units of heavenly aurora have been accumulated. 1000 units of heavenly aurora have been accumulated. Even greater volumes of authority were being mixed in as heavenly aurora was produced, with the process being so glorious and violent that the heavenly organ began to creak and fracture, no matter how big it was growing to accommodate the rapid rate of accumulation. The golden heavenly organ is being put under a great strain. To prevent its apocalypse, the rate of accumulation is being reduced. 800 units of heavenly aurora have been accumulated. 500 units of heavenly aurora have been. 100 units of heavenly aurora have been. The rapid churning and spinning of the heavenly organ slowly and reduced. The overactive vitalis hyperversal authority within Noah's aspects of existence began to calm down as the mountains of authority outside of his body slowly became less intense. In his body, the heavenly organ had fractures extending all over it due to the immense level of purity of the authority it had to mix together, its spinning becoming ever so minuscule as a few final prompts flashed before Noah. A total of 10,000 units of heavenly aurora have been accumulated as the threshold of accumulation for the golden heavenly organ has been reached. Once the golden heavenly organ has been repaired and returned to its prime state within 24 hours, a similar or higher quantity of units of heavenly aurora can be collected again. An obsidian or crimson heavenly organ will be capable of bearing the load of authority at much greater levels. For the next 24 hours, the golden heavenly organ will passively accumulate 1 unit of heavenly aurora per minute until it is fully repaired. Clear guidelines were set as Noah almost broke a recently formed heavenly organ, but the results were stupendous as ridiculously 10,000 units of heavenly aurora were gained within a few seconds. And he could only attain such a number again or even greater after a day passed as his path was bound to be filled with glory. He opened his eyes as his surroundings returned to a level of calm, the stormy mountain of the authority of supernal havens of extremity and heavenly hyperversal authority dispersing. But in the surroundings, things were not as calm as they were before, as heavy and powerful auras now filled the surroundings. The visage of extremity Leda and Kyle floated right before Noah, along with 2 other Haven Saber Smilodon, one of them being the one who had faced extremity blue in the temporal field. On the right side, 4 massive Titanoboas floated majestically as they pulsed with hyperversal extremity authority, while on the left side, 4 extremity dragonflies looked at Noah as their eyes shone with a profound light. Stark silence descended in the surroundings as in such an environment, the visage of Leda responded quickly as her voice thundered out. The heavenly Smilodon lineage will take him into our folds. Chapter 26-27, Grasping Dissolution. Noah's soul radiated brightness as around him, a Haven Saber Smilodon proclaimed that he would be taken into the gold of their lineage. And not a moment later, a Titanoboa pulsing with back flames snorted while booming out. Take him on? Why don't you give that option to him? Have him choose which lineage to join after knowing all the facts. On the left, yet another voice followed out thereafter as an austere Tier 3 hyperversal dragonfly reiterated calmly. And which facts will he receive that won't contain a bias towards one side or against another? Hyperversal extremities spoke out one after another as Noah was gazed at as something they had to enter into their folds. And of course, they had to after witnessing what just occurred with Havenly Authority and the authority of the supernal havens of extremity. As hyperversal extremities, they knew how critical Havenly Authority was. For it to be drawn towards this existence before them, at a rate that only powerful hyperversal extremities, who were lucky enough to find an obsidian or crimson aurora accumulation modus operandi, would be able to compare to. It meant this being had a shocking inclination to Havenly Authority, to the extent they even wanted to ask him some questions about it. Extremity Leda was one of the weakest hyperversal extremities here, being at Tier 1, and yet she harumphed and spoke freely. Humph, just look at him. Which part of him looks like a Titanoboa or dragonfly? From where I stand, he is already a Smilodon you all are trying to poach from this archipelago. Wah! Dazzling words that caused the hyperversal extremities to look at each other ironically were uttered out. They couldn't deny her words, even though they knew this being before them was an underdweller. But before the environment became even more hectic, you all know what it was like when you first gained trenches of Havenly Aurora. Why don't we discuss amongst ourselves and let this young friend here explore the Havenly treasures atop this archipelago and the Titanoboa and Dragonfly archipelagos as well. Decisions can be made after he is more familiar with everything. A deep voice of authority announced from an utterly massive Titanoboa that seemed to be at the very precipice of Tier 3 hyperversal extremity, Zenith just barely out of his grasp. When others heard it, they remained silent with affirmation as they acknowledged Noah and dispersed. Lyda was the only one that remained as she stared at Noah with bestial eyes before she stretched and floated back into the depths of the Havenly Smilodon archipelago. Just remember who was the one showing you the ropes when you first arrived. Her words penetrated Noah's ears as his eyes emanated brightness. They calculated the many possibilities for the future as they ultimately landed on the halos of light floating above this archipelago. There were some that were absolutely crucial to obtain as his will spread out to learn of all the Havenly treasures here. And every time his will passed over them, he received a message right after. You have sufficient units of Havenly Aurora to obtain the Flaming Dissolution Circulation modus operandi. Would you like to obtain it in exchange for 1,000 units of Havenly Aurora? You have sufficient units of Havenly Aurora to obtain the Lightning Dissolution Circulation modus operandi. Would you like to obtain it in exchange for 1,000 units of Havenly Aurora? Methodologies on how to circulate authority in one's aspects of existence that cause the fantastical effects of flames of dissolution or obsidian lightning of dissolution pulsing around the bodies of the Havenly beasts. But with his quintessential breadth of extremity modus operandi, Noah didn't need any of these, as he could at most purchase them as reference materials. His eyes and will continued to wave outwards. You have sufficient units of Havenly Aurora to obtain the fragment of an armament of extremity. Would you like to obtain it in exchange for 1,000 units of Havenly Aurora? You have sufficient units of Havenly Aurora to obtain the entry albatross of armament of extremity. Would you like to obtain it in exchange for 1,000 units of Havenly Aurora? You have sufficient units of Havenly Aurora to obtain the entry albatross of the authority of dissolution. Would you like to obtain it in exchange for 1,000 units of Havenly Aurora? You have sufficient units of Havenly Aurora to obtain the golden extremity panacea of dissolution. Would you like to obtain it in exchange for 100 units of Havenly Aurora? The things his soul sought for showed themselves. Something as fantastical as a fragment of an armament of extremity and an entry albatross that gave him access to truly step on dissolution. There was even a golden extremity panacea of dissolution to aid one across the boundary layers of dissolution. His will was sent out. And soon after, two halos popped and faded away as a blinding singularity shot into Noah's head from the distance, while an obsidian flower decorated with stellar black gems that seemed to contain whole realities within it landed on his hands. The first one was an entry albatross of the authority of dissolution, as the unfinished runic ecriture of dissolution in his soul lit up gorgeous while the rest of the letters began to be completed. And when the N in dissolution fully materialized, the heavy concentration of dissolution in the surroundings seethed again. Noah sucked the potent authority of dissolution nearby as if he was a black hole, a glorious prompt unfolding before him soon after. The first heavenly boundary layer of dissolution has been attained, an authority connecting to the very vitalis havens of extremity. The authority of dissolution has been subtly altered by quintessence. The authority of dissolution is termed a heavenly boundary due to its nature, as elevating it is of utmost difficulty, but attaining hyperversal extremity of dissolution, or any heavenly boundary, will allow one to move unhindered within said haven. Waves of information thundered down as yet another glorious concept was anchored to his soul. The more unique thing in all of this was the fact that he held quintessence. Quintessence had ever so subtly changed dissolution, as in addition to this, quintessence deemed that all of Noah's boundaries would be taken to the 9th boundary layer automatically the moment they were expanded towards extremity. And so, even though it was stated that proceeding across the layers of dissolution was so very difficult, the second heavenly boundary layer of dissolution has been attained. The third heavenly boundary layer of dissolution has been attained. Chapter 26-28, A Weapon Against Hyperversal Extremities. The first heavenly boundary layer of dissolution, while moving under any vitalis havens of extremity, all of your statistical values are increased by 25%. When moving outside the scope of all vitalis havens of extremity, all of your statistical values are increased by 50%. The boundary layers of dissolution were unique ones, as they reveal some truly critical information on these types of boundaries. Noah received its information and continued forward as he put his standing as an absolute hyperversal, inscrutable existence to use, and reduced any ridiculous flashiness around him. With him steadily controlling the waves of dissolution coming inside his existence as all it was spread out across his soul, all the way back to his main body. His main body. It remained in the constantly changing and expanding infinite hyperversal haven that had just swallowed up the noblest planes of existence that were brought to heel under Henry, Aurelia, Orion, and his other vassals. While his reified Wieldian source of indefatigable had entered the supernal haven of dissolution, his main body was moving in the infinite hyperversal haven to do something just as critical. Pulses of dissolution went on the fair hands of his main body in the infinite hyperversal haven, his body being warped across great distances to arrive in the ever-expanding prana alethean haven at this moment. Many changes were being quantified in regards to him, as well as all the wonders that the 15th and 16th boundary layers of his most important boundaries brought forth. Mana dynamics was particularly domineering, as its 16th boundary layer caused his resource regeneration rate to become utterly obscene. The 16th boundary layer of mana dynamics. As you approach extremity, understanding the workings of mana becomes utterly crucial as your reality passages, quintessential breath of extremity, heart, foundation, and all aspects of your existence now flow in harmony to grant you the most pristine flow of energy. You can now regenerate 100% of all quintessential hyperversal values in 60 seconds, with any abilities requiring the usage of quintessential hyperversal soul values having 98% of their cost initially paid for by your quintessential hyperversal mana values. Be prepared, for you know what the endgame is, a glorious description that quantified part of his wonders. And the last sentence of this description was addressed to Noah by the very concept of mana dynamics itself, for him to be prepared as he knew what the endgame was. The endgame. Noah smiled as he felt his endless reserves of mana and what this description would be alluding to. He then gazed around as he arrived at his target location. his eyes feasting at the sight of 7 quintessential undead Thanatos vassals, who seemed to have at their base the 7 Chthonian sinners of Thanatos. Currently, 2 existences were bickering while floating on a verdant crystalline landmass full of life, so absorbed that they barely noticed Noah approaching with his closed-off aura. One had golden hair flowing freely, his fair face showing annoyance at this time as his lab coat fluttered in the wind. The balance towards death has already been tilted too much by you. I say the next phase is to fuse parts of or all of an Ender of Extremity into these 7 champions of Thanatos. That may complete them to an even greater state. Dr. Hall spoke fearlessly as the one standing beside him was a dazzling Haven Lich Razan who currently adorned an obsidian black lab coat, his skull radiating deadly green flames as he also spoke with annoyance. I've kept a delicate balance of life and death so far with the inclusion of a prana Alethian vessel in their souls. Completing them would require a deathly counterpart, maybe the corpse of a hyperversal extremity, or... In the midst of his words, the Haven Lich stopped and turned around as his flaming sockets came to land on Noah. Ah, Master, I apologize for not noticing your arrival sooner. How may this humble skeleton be of assistance? The Haven Lich Razan bowed down as beside him. Dr. Hall did the same while calling out towards Noah. At ease, Noah held a smile as he appreciated the massive champions of Thanatos these 2 beings before him had been working on, having the quintessential absolute Thanatos dynamis of extremity at their core, as with his rising strength, they had evolved to become even grander as well. I'm here for another project today. You'll be working with the Weldian Council of Extremity to come up with a virus, a plaque, a disease, any form of something that will be capable of infecting a hyperversal extremity, along with their recorded histories in the Aeonic Annals of Extremity that will ultimately lead to their demise. Shocking words emanated from him from behind. The Weldian sources of vitalistic Thanatos, Alethian, and Lotra appeared grandly, the only ones not joining being Indefatigable and Oraculum as they went about their own business. 4 of the 6 council members of the Weldian Council of Extremity. They arrived here as Noah was looking for a way to combat hyperversal extremities that were hunting him down. The barrier between those who had attained extremity and those who hadn't was absolute. Billions of apex aeonic lifeforms could group up against a single Tier 1 hyperversal extremity, and they still wouldn't be able to kill such a being. The line of demarcation between extremity was just that vast. Noah would also not be able to threaten an extremity for the next few days, or even possibly weeks, as when he gazed at the possible unrecorded histories to come through Oraculum, he saw no signs of extremity in the short term. Yet he was being chased now. But even if he could not fight against extremities in a straightforward manner, he saw a possibility of fighting them in an underhanded manner. At the core of this possible plan was something he couldn't readily manipulate yet. Yet a change that had occurred in the last few minutes had triggered the opportunities for Noah as he gathered the different parts of his soul, as well as entities like Dr. Hall and the Haven Lich, to design a virus. He would bring any other worthy vassals into this project if need be, but he already gave this project of enacting a virus capable of infecting hyperversal extremities a time limit of a day. The key to this virus, he was imagining, lay in Vitalis hyperversal authority. Something hyperversal authorities desperately sought for, something utilized in the formation of units of Heavenly Aurora. He already theorized that due to its abundance and more open entry in the supernal havens of extremity, there were likely hyperversal extremities that had undergone the first Vitalis awakening, if not even grander opportunities within the supernal havens of extremity. But among the underdwellers, this number should be extremely few in ratio to the vast numbers of hyperversal extremities out there. His enemies, beings like Extremity Blue, had not yet undergone any sort of awakening. Such a being would be extremely perceptive to a virus or poison carried by Vitalis hyperversal authority, as their very souls sought for this authority. And when using the Golden Aurora accumulation modus operandi, this authority would be attracted into one's soul, along with the authority of the supernal haven they were in. Herein lay Noah's access. Herein lay the possibilities. Chapter 26-29, Eons of Change 1. The goal was clear. The Weldian Council of Extremity was convened. The Haven Lich Razan adopted an expression of extreme happiness as the Thanatos quintessential absolute dynamis of extremity buzzed around with glory. We can already alter the very records of those who have perished through Thanatos. We just have to apply this to living when creating whatever master is envisioning. Thereafter, ka-ka-ka! Heavy cackling reverberated out as a flood of authority bloomed. Noah smiled while waving his hands and causing the concentration of authority in the surroundings to rise to alarming levels, his voice ringing out. The crucial thing to grasp in all this is Vitalis hyperversal authority and how it can be weaponized. The project was led by his main body as along with the Wildian Council of Extremity, Dr. Hall, and the Haven Lich Razan, Noah sought a weapon against extremities before he grasped any concept even close to it, within the nether haven of dissolution. The number of apex aeonic life forms and hyperversal extremities had grown exponentially since the appearance of the vein rifts and the shocking changes all throughout the 7 aeonic havens. But the center point remained as countless beings converged here. Those of the 7 clans, those of the major inheritances, they all made their way over as they could feel that the culmination step of the last extremity sanctification was going to be one that made them experience the changing of eons. The changing of the very nature and structure of the 7 havens, as after this, it would not be the same. And at this moment, hung! A blaring horn reverberated out as if it were announcing the arrival of grand existences, with space twisting a violet light permeated across innumerable light years. And soon after, a massive vessel the size of a major plane of existence appeared as it looked like an inverted pyramid, its sharp end pulsing with tendrils of violet light as its structure seemed to be forged from the hardest aeonic metal. It was a vessel known as the Courier of Senidus. It was rarely utilized, but when it was, it represented the power of the Senatus of Extremity making a move. The Senatus of Extremity that held existences standing above allegiances, clans, or inheritances. The governing body of the 7 aeonic havens of extremity. At the top of the Courier of Senidus, the presence of a few billion existences could be felt as at the very forefront. The auras of at least 100,000 hyperversal extremities could be felt. 100,000. The vast majority were of the Tier 1 hyperversal extremity level, as only a few thousand were of Tier 3. But the sheer numbers were enough to give one a glimpse of the power accumulated within the Senidus of extremity over the eons. The millions of apex aeonic life forms who had survived since the first extremity sanctification to now. Many had died over the years as they defended their borders against vacuous malignancies, but many more lived as the power expressed on the Courier of Senidus was not every single apex aeonic life form and hyperversal extremities under their banner. This number was what the Senidus deemed sufficient to explore and take the reins of the occurring changes they had known were coming. But it was hard to say whether they knew just how drastic the changes were. If groups like the Curagulus of Extremity could learn the words, as above so below, what about the Senatus of Extremity? Just to what extent did they know or have any control over what was currently unfolding? Atop the Courier of Senidus, the few billion apex aeonic life forms and 100,000 hyperversal extremities were all adorned in radiant violet robes inlaid with golden lines, the symbol of the inverted pyramid present on the left side of all robes. For the apex aeonic life forms, the inverted pyramid on the robes held an ecriture of 0. Tier 1 hyperversal extremities adorned robes with an ecriture of I, with Tier 2 hyperversal extremities holding an ecriture of 2 on their violet robes and so forth. At the very forefront of the Courier of Senidus, past the lines of tens of thousands of hyperversal extremities, there were a few that stood at the very forefront and stared at the faraway vein rifts. Their bodies gave off a stifling pressure of immensity as these beings had exceeded the Zenith Tier 3 hyperversal extremity stage. They had to at the very least be Tier 4 hyperversal extremities. And yet the violet robes they adorned did not have any markings on their etched pyramids. There were 9 of such beings as a golden-haired man in the middle gazed out into the vein rifts while speaking calmly. What has been learnt so far? His question was laid out in the open, but the voice of a Zenith Tier 3 hyperversal extremity behind him emanated out serenely. The contribution goes to the Avernus clan for this information, as one of theirs has already entered, but the theory of entirely separate havens within the extremity vein has been confirmed, with the first things that one can come across being things like entry albatross of the authority of dissolution, capable of being obtained for a cost. Oh! The words of the serene voice raised a few brows as a tan woman on the right side of the 9 existences exeneth tier 3. Hyperversal extremity spoke out sharply. The treasures of extremity that have been appearing in the extremity step of the previous havens are freely available at the culmination step here. Things like the entry albatross of the authority of different havens were obtained by them before in the previous processes of extremity sanctification. Otherwise, how would beings like the adjudicator of dissolution wield the authority of dissolution? Or the other 6 adjudicators of their own havens wield the authority of the land they were supposed to oversee? The words of these existences revealed many things. The courier of Senatus approached closer and closer, some clustered inheritances moving away as many stared towards them with a combination of calm and fear. This was how prominent and assertive they were across the 7 Aeonic havens. Chapter 2630, Eons of Change. When the massive courier of Senatus neared close to the vein rifts ahead of them, the figure of the golden-haired man flashed forward as he only took a few steps to instantly appear past the transparent barrier of a vein rift that held 3 Tier 3 Havenly Siren beasts and their legions behind them. The 3 Havenly beasts became stern at the appearance of this existence before them, their fish-like lower bodies smashing their tails down as their gorgeous humanoid upper bodies veered away, the legions behind them splitting left and right as they made a path. It was a shocking phenomenon observed by others, as this was the first time that the phrase, "You may gain passage so long as you are victorious," was not repeated when an existence approached. Instead, the stage of power you have attained grants you free entry. Lightsvel The sonorous voice of the Havenly Siren echoed out with glory. Beings that had exceeded Zenith Tier 3 hyperversal extremity did not need to prove themselves. The stage of power they had achieved was enough of a deal of approval in itself. The gaze of the golden-haired man was placid at this development as he waved his hands behind him. And an instant later, tens of Tier 3 hyperversal extremities surged forward and appeared behind him, seemingly ready to traverse with him into the misty fog in the distance. Their appearance caused the expressions of the Tier 3 Havenly Sirens to turn cold, as before they could say anything. Wah! He didn't ask whether they would allow it or not. His question was so tyrannical that he already made it known that he would be coming with those behind him, and he simply asked for the limit on the number. The gazes of the Havenly Sirens were sharp as the Zenith Tier 3 hyperversal extremity at the very forefront spoke out for all to hear. An existence exceeding Zenith Tier 3 hyperversal extremity may at most take 100 other existences to enter with him. That is the extent their authority can cover. The tyranny of Tier 4 hyperversal extremities was seemingly accounted for, as for them, many rules were bent. The golden-haired personage at the very forefront nodded as he began stepping forward, 100 Tier 3 hyperversal extremities following his path as very quickly they disappeared into the obsidian mist as they would find themselves near the Havenly Siren archipelagos. Outside of the vein rifts, others were shocked at the new development, as on the courier of Senatus, the tan woman whose skin shone with a caramel stellar luster smiled as she also began to float towards a vein rift. Esteemed Thaddeus has gone ahead as the rest of you must follow. For those who have to fight for entry, defeat is not an option. Her words were directed to the masses of existences atop the courier of Senatus, her figure stepping into a vein rift and coming across the same treatment as she also waved her hands to select a chosen 100 Tier 3 hyperversal extremities that disappeared along with her into the obsidian mist. The myriad of inheritances and clans watched this scene playing out with brilliant eyes, as at this moment, all vein rifts had multiple beings seeking entry. One of the more quiet ones held a single temporal field of dissolution that pulsed at this moment, the visage of a massive Titanoboa and the adjudicator of dissolution stepping out of it. The veil on the adjudicator of dissolution remained calm, as not a shred of evidence of battle could be seen on her. with the massive Titanoboa only nodding slightly towards the Lord Commander Smilodon, as even though its massive obsidian scales were just as pristine, one could sense the aura around it being turbid and unstable. The adjudicator of dissolution gazed around with her will, observing the recent developments as after a few seconds, her figure disappeared into the obsidian mist ahead. She had made her preparations already as her main body delved into the supernal havens of extremity. Her hyperversal extremity clone would remain in the haven she was leaving, as her role had never ended. Within the supernal haven of dissolution, in the Havenly Smilodon archipelago. How does a havenly boundary feel compared to the concepts you've expanded before? The voice of the Tier 1 hyperversal extremity Leda rang out as Noah opened his eyes and gazed at the genuine authority of dissolution around his body. It had achieved the 9th boundary layer through quintessence, as now, his visage of Alexander would place it in his meridians for it to enjoy the ridiculous boon of matching the highest boundary layer that Noah had achieved. As he felt how pronounced and different it was compared to other concepts of extremity, his reply to extremity Leda was mild. It's so-so. It's so-so. Come. They allowed me to be the one to tell you more about the supernal havens of extremity and what a being like you fits into all this before you make a decision on where to go. As she spoke, hyperversal extremity authority erupted around to encircle their figures, both of them being taken to the depths of the Havenly Smilodon archipelago. Not too far from the archipelago, in front of an endlessly massive obsidian misty wall, the figure of the adjudicator of dissolution just so happened to emerge at this time as the auras of many turned towards her. Noah's will also only gazing briefly before he arrived at the depths of the Havenly Smilodon archipelago. A zenith. The big dogs are beginning to come in, it seems. Leda spoke with a smile as they went past groves of ancient trees and passed through a veiled barrier, the reality around them changing as they seemed to have entered the depths of the archipelago. The massive trees disappeared around them as they appeared in a stellar enclosed domain shining with obsidian. Singularities like stars all around, with a huge cylindrical architecture made of obsidian crystals pulsing with dissolution floating at the very center. On this massive structure, the auras of the hyperversal extremities within the Havenly Smilodon archipelago could be felt as the figures of Leda and Noah entered one of the many floors of this grand building. Noah observing pools of golden liquefied treasure light on the four ends of this floor, as in the center, a long rectangular table holding a dense cluster of aeonic treasures of extremity in the form of ecstatic fruits and herbs overflowed. Thrones were laid out around this grand table as the feline figure of Leda began to change at this moment, her visage turning curvaceous and humanoid as a black dress came to drape over her. Dazzling inky black hair flowed to her shoulders and endlessly black pupils smiled towards Noah as she went to sit on one of the thrones around the grand table. Even a zeniths can't enter in here. Come, be comfortable. At her words, Noah's figure also changed to become humanoid, though his face carried distinct changes as he seemed like a sharp genius of some faction. Leda pursed her lips at this as she reached out to grab grapes pulsing with tendrils of dissolution around them. Not your original devilishly handsome face, huh? Too bad. Have a seat, and let me tell you about the supernal havens of extremity. Wah! Her dark eyes radiated an enticing majesty as she plucked the grapes before her, Noah sitting on an opposing throne naturally as he gazed at this Tier 1 hyperversal extremity who continued with a smile. First, one of the crucial points every underdweller needs to quickly grasp is that in these supernal havens of extremity, Havenly Aurora is everything. Havenly Aurora was everything. Vitalis hyperversal authority mixed with the authorities of the supernal havens was everything. Units of Havenly Aurora are a currency and a commodity, with the naturally formed Havenly treasures you've seen in this golden Havenly archipelago being only the tip of the iceberg. In Obsidian and Crimson Havenly archipelagos, there are things that individuals cannot acquire, even if they accumulate Havenly Aurora for their whole lifetime. Hyperversal Havenly treasures costing millions and billions of units of Havenly Aurora to acquire. There are Havenly archipelagos one cannot even near unless they have a backing. unless they are a part of the four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages. And herein lies your conundrum, my dear underdweller anomaly. Chapter 2631, Unfathomable Depth. 1. His conundrum. Lights fell within the supernal havens of extremity. Four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages were reigning over the masses as when it came to the truly critical heavenly treasures. One couldn't even near the archipelagos they were in unless they held the right status. Noah gazed at the visage of extremity Leda before him as he asked lightly, just to what extent do the four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages hold sway in the supernal havens of extremity? How grand was their position? How unshakable was their might? Noah asked simply to grasp a bit more about the structure of these new lands, but the reply was a heavy one as extremity Leda smiled brightly. They hold sway over everything. Their influence has reached an unfathomable depth within these havens as they hold the most heavenly aurora in their hands. And since heavenly aurora is the most crucial thing in these havens, they hold the most power. And this power is centered around something forged and built by all four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages, the heavenly vaults. Something enacted by the most powerful entities whose sheer influence across the supernal havens of extremity was unfathomable. As she spoke about it, Leda's voice was calm, as if all of this was simply the way of life. When she spoke about the heavenly vaults, her feline eyes lit up brightly as she continued with enthusiasm. Something you may not know yet is when one collects a great deal of the units of heavenly aurora, let's say beginning by exceeding 100,000, your body will start emitting a rich aura of heavenly authority that actually acts like a beacon for others. It invites challengers whether you like it or not. If you somehow overcome and accumulate 1 million units of heavenly aurora for a pristine hyperversal extremity treasure, even Tier 3 hyperversal extremities will come to challenge you no matter your stage of power, as such a number is extremely enticing. So at any point in time while you're working hard to collect tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of units of heavenly aurora, you can be challenged and defeated as you lose everything, years worth of accumulation. This is why a single being can never truly save up millions of units of heavenly aurora over their lifetime, as the rich aura they automatically and uncontrollably emit will only become more powerful, inviting terrifying challengers until they lose everything. And this was where the four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages came in. They forged the heavenly vaults as they allowed the haven races to willingly transfer their units of heavenly aurora to be stored and kept safe, as in exchange, one is given a heavenly note of extremity. As Leda spoke, she waved her hands to reveal a gold piece of paper. It was rectangular in shape as it pulsed with the authorities of multiple supernal havens of extremity. Noah, seeing this gold note inscribed with a myriad of runic markings, as it held a runic ecriture of I at its very center, that pulsed with the authorities of all 7 havens, a heavenly note of extremity. Leda waved it in front of her serenely as she continued with a smile. A currency. This single heavenly note in my hand is worth 10,000 units of heavenly aurora, as this is the method existences use to amass large units of heavenly aurora over the years. They store what they accumulate before it reaches alarming levels to emit a rich aura of heavenly authority and transfer it into the heavenly vaults run by the four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages for a fee. And whenever they have accumulated enough units of heavenly aurora for whatever they wish to attain, they exchange all their heavenly notes for the equivalent units of heavenly aurora within the sacred crimson heavenly archipelagos where no challenges are accepted. That's how the heavenly vaults came to be, as under the control of the four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages, they have amassed billions of units of heavenly aurora, charging fees for all who use their services to store and keep their units of heavenly aurora and even heavenly notes safe before they can be utilized. The fees of units of heavenly aurora they rack up alone on a daily basis are more than a lifetime's work that hundreds or thousands of extremities can accomplish, as those in the upper echelons of the four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages are the wealthiest of existences. And the wealthiest are naturally the most powerful, as they can access the most glorious hyperversal heavenly treasures. Noah's eyes radiated brightness as this being before him spoke, with the things she currently said making Noah think of these heavenly vaults she was mentioning as some form of a banking system utilized by the upper echelons of power in the supernal havens of extremity. He even scrutinized the paper currency that seemed to be forged airtight and with profound authority, as on the four corners of the heavenly note of extremity that Leda had pulled out. Noah saw four symbols that should represent the four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages. It was a fantastical system, as at the crux of it, though, lay the question of how. A question that Noah raised to the extremity before him. These heavenly vaults of extremity that the four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages enacted, what exactly are they? Isn't the transferring of units of heavenly aurora done person to person? When an existence began exceeding tens of thousands of units of heavenly aurora, an uncontrollable scent of heavenly authority emitted from them that would invite challenges. How did the heavenly vaults remain active and unbothered over the eons, and allow the four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages to amass the power that they now held? When arriving at this question, Extremity Leda became serious, as she caused the heavenly note in front of her to disappear, her words succinct as she stared at Noah closely. Because the ones who forged and stand guard over the heavenly vaults are those who have undergone heavenly awakening. For them, an immense authority has been grasped as, unlike all of us, the scent of heavenly authority is able to be controlled and even hidden. Chapter 2632, Unfathomable Depth. 2. Heavenly Awakening. The moment Noah heard this term, he affirmed that there were an untold number of beings that had undergone Vitalis awakenings within the supernal havens of extremity. Those who had their first Vitalis awakening were half like him, while those who had undergone their second Vitalis awakening were ahead of him, as they could actively control Vitalis hyperversal authority. And such beings were considered the most powerful, as with their means, they enacted the heavenly vaults of extremity. A massive system that circulated billions of units of heavenly aurora with the influence of the four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages, being so vast that they even controlled who could access archipelagos that could generate the most quintessential hyperversal extremity treasures. With his unique power and the fact that he had already undergone his first Vitalis awakening, there were many ways Noah could play things going forward, as with sharp eyes, he joined Leda in enjoying the feast before him as she continued. Those who have undergone heavenly awakenings are rare, but they have increased in number over the years, as the privilege granted to them is an indescribable one. But don't you worry about them. They're too far from our grasp. Her dark eyes let out an enticing light as she stopped eating the grapes pulsing with dissolution and focused her feline eyes on him entirely, as if she had arrived at the most crucial part. Now, your choice to make is which of the four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages to join, but at the same time, it's not really much of a choice. The Smilodons, Titanoboas, and Dragonflies you have come across so far, we all stem from the hyperversal heavenly Animalia extremity lineage. Under the Animalia extremity lineage, there are branches of subfamilies like the Smilodons, Titanoboas, Dragonflies, Sirens, Mammoths, Saurischians, and many others. Joining any of us is joining the Animalia extremity lineage, with the only difference being the level of power we hold compared to others. The hyperversal heavenly Animalia extremity lineage. After Leda spoke about this one, she continued slowly on what the other three were right after. The other heavenly extremity lineages that you would have to travel far from here to come across are the heavenly Plantae extremity lineage, the heavenly Riboviria extremity lineage, and heavenly Celestia extremity lineage. You're an interesting underdweller, as after drawing our eyes, the Smilodons, Titanoboas, or Dragonflies can grant you a heavenly recommendation to join any of the four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages. The biggest boost I can tell you without being biased is that joining any of them will allow you access to the heavenly vaults of extremity. A heavenly recommendation was required to join any of the four hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages. For all incoming underdwellers, unless they showed a tremendous level of power as hyperversal extremities or displayed something unique like Noah, they could not freely join the heavenly lineages. and only by joining would one gain access to utilize the Havenly Vaults of Extremity. So those are the basic facts to allow you to make an informed decision. The question for you is, what will it be? Extremity Leta asked with a rosy smile, even though Noah's choice was already made. He wouldn't reveal anything about his first Vitalis awakening, as he needed to collect more information and understand this other side of the Seven Havens more. This was still just supposed to be the culmination step of Extremity sanctification, as who knew what more surprises the future held. The most critical thing remained his path. The most critical thing remained his enemies. So he gazed at the feline extremity before him as he tapped on the glimmering table, his voice steady and filled with majesty. I shall join the Havenly Animalia extremity lineage through the Smilodons.
What?
His words caused Leda to smile brilliantly as she nodded and caused waves of hyperversal extremity authority to erupt in the surroundings. I'll pass on the good news to the Titanoboas and dragonflies. See if you want to obtain any other Havenly treasures in this golden Havenly archipelago, or you can save up your units of Havenly Aurora for where we have to go to in order to officially grant you a status as an existence belonging to the Havenly Animalia extremity lineage. We shall head to an obsidian Havenly archipelago. There, you will find Havenly treasures that can aid you in bringing dissolution or any of your concepts of extremity towards the 15th, 16th, or even the 17th boundary layer, along with Havenly treasures to reinforce your extremity foundation or to further elevate your apocryphal havens and bring your realm to an even greater level. Fantastical words were released from her as they both rose, her curvaceous figure emanating great power as she continued with a sharp smile while walking towards him. You'll come to love the Smilodon lineage. Our strongest reach the upper echelons of the Havenly Animalia extremity lineage, as some even oversee branches of the Havenly Vaults of Extremity, and you'll come to find that most Smilodons truly know how to have fun. As she spoke the last set of words, her hourglass figure and blessed chest were even further magnified as she came to stand beside Noah, tendrils of hyperversal extremity authority rising from her. Noah raised his brows as he asked calmly, "Even you? Me?" Her dark eyes were filled with a light of innocence as she blinked while letting out a laugh. "Ask me about that again when you attain extremity. Maybe then I will entertain you." The hyperversal extremity authority emanating from her fully wrapped around them thereafter as within an instant, their figures disappeared. In the infinite hyperversal haven, Noah's main body was calmly discussing with the Wildian Council of Extremity, along with Dr. Hall and the Haven Lich, on the creation of a virus that utilized the Vitalis hyperversal authority at its core, with multiple new boundaries including pathogenicity and plague being expanded for this endeavor as everything was proceeding smoothly this far. And in the midst of all of this, Noah's will was moving to do something else entirely, within his main body. Towards the peak of his origin where his fourth Alethean haven stood, his soul focused on it as at this moment an obsidian spark of a singularity bloomed, an obsidian spark of dissolution. Amidst the havens that were only forged with 9 dimensions at their base, another entirely different type of haven sought to come to fruition. Chapter 2633, Unfathomable Depth. Havens filled with dreams, Prana, Avalon, Elysium, Fantasia, Niflheim, Mirror, Quantum, and Apollyon at their source were ever present in Noah's origin. They enacted his Alethean havens of extremity, that if completed up to the 9th Alethean haven of extremity, Noah would attain a profound level of extremity. He wouldn't be like other beings who achieved extremity in a concept and slowly worked to then bring other concepts to extremity. His starting line would be multiple concepts instantly reaching extremity at the same time, as would he truly only be Tier 1 when the time came? This was a question for the future. For now, Noah was once more trying something marvelous, as in addition to the havens of past dimensions, a spark of dissolution bloomed above the 4th Alethean haven. And with it, the havenly boundary of dissolution seethed and churned in Noah's origin as it began to cycle and propagate within his origin. The singularity was a starting point. Thereafter, a construct began to bloom. The source of a new haven has emerged in your origin. Due to incongruency with the havens within the 4th Alethean haven, The new haven has begun as the basis of the fifth Alithian haven of extremity. Above the fourth Alithian haven, a fifth one began to form. It was minuscule in scale compared to the other four havens below it, but the breadth and power it displayed was utterly unfathomable. The haven of dissolution has been born in your origin. The potential and immensity of the haven of dissolution vastly outstrips your prior havens, and so does its requirement to expand, refine, and strengthen. On the fifth Alithian haven of extremity, dissolution ran free and rampant as stellar obsidian. Cosmos began to rise along with inky black rivers of reality, and they were proliferating quickly as the little essence gathered within Noah's origin towards it was being used up. But there was something Noah had at this moment that gave him confidence in being able to successfully enact and expand this new glorious haven. And his Riphied Waldian source of indefatigable was looking at it at this very moment above the heavenly Smilodon archipelago as he was obtaining anything he might need before he set off with Leda. You have sufficient units of heavenly aurora to obtain Epioni's golden realm blessing. Would you like to obtain it in exchange for 1,000 units of heavenly aurora? A profound heavenly treasure that actually required many units of heavenly aurora, but it was the mainstream and one of the more profound treasures to elevate one's realm. Noah knew so without even buying it yet, as he had seen the unrecorded history where he had bought such a wondrous thing through oraculum. The cost of 1,000 units of heavenly aurora was paid as the halo of light around a blinding Halcyon statue of a woman could be seen. She was adorned in a light gold robe as her eyes were forever closed, her beauty never to be seen again. This was Epion's golden realm blessing. As the moment Noah attained it in the supernal haven of dissolution, it entered his vaults of quintessence that his main body instantly pulled it out from as within moments. Shah! It appeared above the barely forming fifth Alithian haven of extremity. Epione was in existence trying to scale an unknown hyperversal tier of extremity when she took an action that could affect the supernal havens of extremity themselves. She ultimately failed in her endeavor as her will, soul, concepts, and everything that made her were assimilated into the supernal havens of extremity. To this day, havenly treasures that are geared towards the ultimate progression of apocryphal havens in one's origin continue to be generated within the supernal havens of extremity. A fantastical havenly treasures whose description revealed a few fantastical things. But Noah sent his will into it and activated such a wonder as a moment later, the statue cracked and radiated glorious golden light. A massive illusory figure of a woman with her eyes closed appearing above Noah's havens, her hand waving outwards as seas of golden essence rained down only the forming fifth Alithian haven of extremity, as if it was rain hitting a dry earth. And the instant the sea of essence cascaded down, the budding haven of dissolution trembled as trillions of cosmos and realities began to emerge and proliferate. The size and sheer magnitude of the haven began to expand rapidly as the illusory figure of the golden woman remained, Epione's golden realm blessing continuing its wonders even now. And when the growth of the haven of dissolution reached a certain threshold, ZT, Noah felt something within his body pulse and react. Gradually, a devilish smile rose on his main body as he felt his innate Vitalis hyperversal meridians pulsing, the meridians holding Vitalis hyperversal authority he couldn't control. At this moment, they pulsed as from them, small streams of Vitalis hyperversal authority rose and sank into Noah's origin, appearing above the emerging haven of dissolution as the obsidian light of grandeur from this haven rose up to meet the streams of Vitalis hyperversal authority. A unique quality of the haven of dissolution has unveiled itself. The streams of Vitalis hyperversal authority and the authority of dissolution mixed with each other as in a wondrous turn of events. It resulted in the budding of a blinding halo of light above the fifth Alithian haven of extremity. The authority within the haven of dissolution will passively attract Vitalis hyperversal authority at the very peak of the haven, the two authorities mixing naturally to birth hyperversal extremity treasures. Ah! Noah had theorized it. Oraculum had seen the unrecorded histories and confirmed it, and Noah proceeded with it. He had thought that since the supernal haven of dissolution was drawing and mixing with Vitalis hyperversal authority to make the shocking havenly treasures above the archipelagos, what would happen if he enacted a similar haven within him along with his innate Vitalis hyperversal meridian? Chapter 2634, Unfathomable Depth, IV. The answer was a glorious one. The level and size of the haven of dissolution within the fifth Alethian haven of extremity is extremely low, as the hyperversal extremity treasures born will be of low tier and of limited amounts. The expansion of the haven of dissolution and other types of havens similar to it will allow for more possibilities. At its current stage, a single hyperversal extremity treasure can be forged within 24 hours. It was small. It was a scale that was minuscule, even while comparing it to a single heavenly archipelago of the countless archipelagos within the supernal heavens of extremity. But on this day, Noah had managed to replicate an action of unfathomable importance, as at this time, his innate Vitalis hyperversal authority pulsed with activity as small streams of it steadily flowed and mixed into a singularity at the very top of his fifth Alethian haven of extremity. Dissolution being the other counterpart, as together, they created something grand. Noah's will pervasively gazed at all other parts of him, as when his eyes came to land on his innate vacuous hyperversal meridians, he saw they were utterly still and silent. They didn't react to any of this as Noah gazed at the meridians with a pondering gaze, Epione's golden realm blessing in his wine. Origin still continuing as the haven of dissolution continued to expand silently. As this process unfolded, outside of Noah's main body, the voice of the Haven Lich Razan could be heard as it was filled with power and reverence. Council member Thanatos is right. If Master was forced to undergo cycles of death because of the clash between Vitalis and vacuous hyperversal authority, what if the poison veils vacuous hyperversal authority in the midst of Vitalis hyperversal authority without causing them to clash? And during the moment that an extremity is absorbing havenly authority into their havenly organ, they take in streams of a bomb that is yet to go off in their havenly organ. Noah smiled at the words another part of him had uttered out that the Haven Lich expanded on. He then raised his head to stare past the Prana Alethian haven they were in as he spoke serenely. If this can successfully be done, all that is needed thereafter is a pathogenic element that will allow the virus to spread across all of their existence, to their very recorded history as well. Utterly dreadful and deadly discussions were taking place as Noah's eyes tore across the veils of space, his will coming to cover the vastness of these lands that were constantly expanding as at this moment, within the infinite hyperversal haven itself. Noah's soul made yet another move as a massive singularity bloomed in a corner of this haven itself. Beautifully obsidian in color and radiating the authority of dissolution, Noah also sought to enact a haven of dissolution within the infinite hyperversal haven, across the folds of space-time. Past the broken-down walls of the 7 aeonic havens of extremity, a circular extremity vein continued to pulse, radiating multicolored light all around as it took the eyes of many. At this point, though, the vast majority had made their way towards dissolution. The vast majority. There were still some that didn't go, whether it was through a reason of weakness, strength, or any other. Within the haven of Elora, a man with deeply blue eyes stood atop a fractured crimson planar sun, his eyes pulsing with cerulean arcs of light as his dark hair flowed grandly. Behind him, a dark-haired woman with a gorgeous figure and sleek obsidian hair that fell past her shoulders floated over as she spoke. Your sister is still stabilizing her meridians. We're sure about not going towards dissolution? It seems like the center point of change unfolding in these havens is occurring there. The woman was a gorgeous one all around, as her identity was a unique one, stemming outside of the 7 havens not too long ago. The man smiled while shaking his head. No, Europa. If I didn't come across that, then I would have definitely rushed over. But with it, too many other possibilities open up. As he spoke, his endlessly blue eyes became dim and were replaced by an immense darkness of an authority of utmost nothingness. Who could have expected clusters of vacuous malignancies to be so deeply embedded into the 7 havens? And for me to dominate the dying shred of soul, a vacuous malignancy hunted by the Senatus of extremity, Ah, with such a thing in my hands, I'll take my path elsewhere entirely. As soon as I gain full control of its body, we shall set off outside the scope of reality and time itself. The dominance of the dying shred of the soul of a vacuous malignancy. The being standing beside Europa thought of this unimaginable fortune, however broken and shattered it was. Since the vacuous malignancy was quite literally at death's door, their records were shattered and scattered, their concepts of extremity broken and scorched from their existence. But he could still feel them. In time, he felt like he could piece them together. When that time came, extremity would be within grasp. But for now, his path was crystal clear. His head rose as he stared out at the aurora of crimson lights all around them. The vacuous hyperversal domains, my destiny will continue to unfold there. Just as there are countless possibilities within the Seven Havens, there are countless more outside of it. And who knows, maybe while outside the scope of space and time, I may actually stand a chance of catching up to Osmont. He's already made dissolution into his playing field from the recent news. His eyes returned to their bright luster as the vacuous hyperversal authority faded within them. Beside him, Europa shook her head as she clutched onto his arm and stared out into the expanse of crimson light. Who knows? But you'll have to be careful, Eckert. From the memories you've obtained about these vacuous malignancies, their lands are steeped with even more dangers than anywhere within the Seven Havens. At her words, Noah Eckert smiled with a devilish glint while letting out a laugh soon after. Dangers and opportunities go hand in hand. I want to know more, Europa. I want to understand why the vitalis hyperversal domains and the vacuous hyperversal domains are the way they are. I want to know more about the memory that makes vacuous malignancies act with such urgency. I want to know more about the ones above extremity. Chapter 2635, All in One. One being chose their path while they stood within a corner of Elera. Meanwhile, countless others within the Seven Havens chose their own paths, as in the Haven of Dissolution. Every single vein rift was pulsing with battle, as many beings were rejected entry, while some unique and powerful ones were granted entry as they passed through. At this moment, in a corner that had few inheritances cautious to even approach it, a temporal field of dissolution trembled as two figures came out of it. One was in existence actually granted the title of Lord Commander, a perennial oak whose aura should have been at the very top of Zenith Tier 3 hyperversal extremity. And yet the gaze of the titanic perennial oak, whose visage was that of a glorious stellar tree with a dominant face curved at its center point. Such an entity held shock in its eyes as it looked at the man who also came out from the temporal field of dissolution. His white robe was untouched as his sword remained sheathed behind his back, his light caramel-colored skin pulsing with a stellar radiance, as this being was none other than Emperor Shao. He had faced a Zenith Tier 3 hyperversal extremity with an earned title of Lord Commander and came out of the battle as if nothing had happened. The gaze of the perennial oak was stern as it spoke out, a light flashing in front of it, as a verdant scroll of light emerged and floated towards Emperor Shao. You have gained entry. When you delve deeper into the supernal havens of dissolution, you will come across obsidian and crimson heavenly archipelagos where you can utilize this, a havenly plante recommendation. The scroll arrived before him as Emperor Shao waved his hands and accepted it, nodding towards the perennial oak as a moment later he turned into a glimmer of light that disappeared into the obsidian mist ahead. Only at this point did the forces of inheritances in the surroundings feel like they could breathe again, as extremities and apex aeonic life forms surged forward to gain entry. In another vein rift, fluctuations of the 11th boundary layer of dissolution buzzed around a havenly siren as she was knocked back forcefully, the visage of Erickson in light crimson beach attire standing opposite to it as a cold voice rose. You have gained entry. The words were emotionless ones, as on the other side, Erickson merely smiled while taking the easy win. On his person, he held enough extremity treasures to propel a few of his concepts across the boundary layers, as if it were nothing, this being the product of his father and the Sima clan. Yet he didn't utilize them all, as he only dipped his feet into the reserves of treasures to bring his boundary of probability to the 11th layer. He wanted to give himself an easier time gaining entry, as hereafter he could begin fully devouring the trenches of extremity treasures prepared by his clan to quickly go towards the 17th boundary layer. He wasn't the only one doing this, as when he turned his head to the distance, he could see Ayame, Atlas, and a few others that were just like him. Nepotism at its best. He nodded with a smile as he proceeded forward, the extremity of Foundation and a few others who had gained entry waiting for him. Being born into the right family or clan was also destiny and fortune. Erickson planned to use such a fortune fully, as he would never deny something freely granted to him. He would use it to attain a power capable of true change in these vast havens, where currently he was still one of its weakest creatures. He wouldn't have dared to dream of it before, but with the last extremity sanctification proceeding this way, many extremities would be forged in a short period of time. Whether he would attain Tier 3 hyperversal extremity or Tier 4 at the end of it remained to be seen. With a glimmer of light and innumerable thoughts, he disappeared into the obsidian mist along with multiple forces of the Sima clan, one after another, little by little. It was a gradual process, but the vast inheritances and 7 clans of the Nether Havens of Extremity converged as they went all into the unfolding wonder of dissolution that currently acted like a gateway into a grand stage. A stage that at this moment already had main players running rampant, but none of them knew of the monsters stepping onto this stage and about to shake things up for better or for worse. Across dissolution, towards the vein rifts, where the abundant forces of Avernus were stationed and beginning to gain entry, Chambermaster Guckus had a solemn expression as he stood beside multiple other Tier 3 hyperversal extremities atop a massive titanic vessel that looked like an exclusive ship constructed out of crystals, radiating waves of silent extremity. In front of the many Tier 3 hyperversal extremities, a man veiled in pristine purple light stood valiantly as everything about him was veiled, his aura and power far exceeding those behind him, as beside such a figure, a veiled woman also covered by a veil of purple light stood strong. Lightsvelm Chambermaster Gaiacus had a difficult expression as he spoke around such powerhouses. I realize this may be presumptuous to be a topic of conversation with Sire and all of us, but we aren't making any headway with the public enemy of Avernus. This is my failure as the Chambermaster tasked with this issue. Extremity Blue lost his tracks and hasn't gotten close to finding him, even though she entered the lands ahead right after him. He is just an apex aeonic life form, but there are instances in history where beings even weaker than him eventually became grave issues for inheritances or clans. I don't know how to proceed with this, if Sire can shed some light. It was difficult for him to say these words. After all, the enemy was an apex aeonic life form. Beside him, a few other chamber masters sneered as a woman with radiant crimson hair spoke with some admonishment. Merely an apex aeonic life form, and you can't even... Do not treat him as a mere apex aeonic life form. Before the crimson-haired extremity could finish, the magnetic being ahead of them spoke as all those behind him stared with astonishment. Chapter 2636, All In, 2. An apex aeonic life form truly caught the eye of their sire, of the Avernus Extremity Overlord. The being shrouded with royal purple light continued calmly. Amestris, tell them of your findings. His words were directed to the veiled woman beside him who radiated power almost in line with his, but it felt more mysterious, more obscure. Many eyes turned towards her as this veiled existence let out a beautiful voice. There are very few existences that I cannot see in the aeonic annals of extremity. Even those that have achieved extremity and enacted an absolute dynamis of extremity veiling, then within the aeonic annals of extremity, I can still find and obtain information. And yet this Noah Osmont, I can find nothing. Beside Chambermaster Gaiacus, Extremity Ariana was entirely solemn as she and the others listened. This leaves very few possibilities for this being as an entity. It means that in addition to an absolute dynamis of extremity, he is either being actively masked by at the very minimum a Tier 4 hyperversal extremity, or he has a type of authority very few of us understand in his grasp in addition to vacuous hyperversal authority. When she arrived here, many gazes changed. Chambermaster Gaiacus turned ashen as he voiced out slowly. Vitalis, boom! Vitalis hyperversal authority. Something they barely understood, and yet beings of their level knew to be an intricate part of the Seven Havens. All of these are theories and conjectures, but with any of them, the outcome is not ideal. The unrecorded histories I can view are becoming murky and cloudy. With the advent of the supernal havens of extremity ahead of us, eliminating any uncertainties coming for us is crucial. So yes, this enemy, do not treat them as an apex aeonic life form. Use all means at your disposal to find him. Your mission for these supernal havens of extremity, half of it will be locating and containing this threat. As for the one whose actions sparked all this, her veiled gaze turned to go towards a corner behind the Tier 3 hyperversal extremities standing side by side with Chambermaster Gaiacus and Ariana. Behind them, towards the row of Tier 2 hyperversal extremities, her gaze was singularly on a being whose face had turned entirely ashen as if blood was no longer flowing. Destruction. The only reason you are still alive is because of the hyperversal extremity of chaos. She has brought you 1 week. If the threat of Osmont isn't reined in at that time, your soul will be used as the basis of an extremity soul compass, unless you bring another extremity to stand on your behalf as the material for it. Dreadful words emanated from her as a heavy silence descended. Extremity. Ariana stared back at Destruction, whose face convulsed with countless emotions. How did he arrive here from such a high stature, for him to even be standing alongside Tier 2 hyperversal extremities? All of it boiled down to choices. And at this moment, even more choices were made as a burning purple light erupted around the Avernus extremity overlord that enveloped him and a select number of extremities behind him. When this light disappeared, they were all gone. And an instant later, they appeared before the transparent veil of a certain vein rift that held a havenly saber Smilodon Lord Commander, Titanoboas, and dragonflies. The same gateway that Noah took. Light's novel. The havenly saber Smilodon gazed at them calmly, as when he saw the two beings wrapped by a veil of purple light ahead of the cluster of extremities, his voice was a calm one. Your standing grants you free entry. Without a word, the Avernus extremity overlord and the most terrifying seer of the Avernus clan, known as Seer Amestris, floated forward. Behind them, 200 hyperversal extremities followed in order as they delved into the supernal haven of dissolution. Past the obsidian mist, they very quickly appeared as they gazed at the wondrous scene of floating havenly archipelagos. Seer Amestris gazed at the surroundings quickly as her gaze came to land on the golden havenly Smilodon archipelago, her veiled figure pulsing with power as a shocking voice emanated soon after. He was there. He couldn't be tracked in the aeonic annals of extremity, yes, but there were other methods apart from this. One of the more straightforward ones was to have a terrifying Tier 4 hyperversal extremity trace his steps. Amestris, lead them to track down this Osmond. The rest of you, with me, the hyperversal extremity treasures within these lands must be made use of. The goal is to produce as many Zenith Tier 3 hyperversal Avernus extremities as possible. Otherwise, we will not even be able to carve out any domains within these lands to occupy. The Avernus extremity overlord spoke in a regal tone as the forces behind them split in half, the means and goals of the leaders of clans being unfathomable to grasp as one moved to achieve his own ideals. The surroundings were becoming filled with even greater concentrations of dissolution. Enclosed within a circular domain of hyperversal extremity authority, Noah's reified Wieldian source of Indefatigable was standing beside Extremity Leda in her Smilodon form, as they had already begun their venture towards an obsidian havenly archipelago. Noah continued talking with Extremity Laita and expanded his breadth of knowledge regarding the supernal havens of extremity he had just stepped into, as well as the 4 hyperversal havenly extremity lineages and their distinctions. But even though his reified source was carrying this calm demeanor, his soul that was stretched out across many domains was churning and moving rapidly to elevate his power and pace of progression. This was because on the havenly Smilodon archipelago that he had just left, he had taken a small part of his will and left it behind, simply to observe who else apart from Extremity Blue would be making their way over here. And he was just faced with a scene of hundreds of hyperversal extremities, including Gaiacus and Ariana, that he came across in the Cult of Endless Shadows and later learned of their positions through Erickson and the Sema clan. He saw the Tier 3 hyperversal extremities, as well as the veiled beings ahead of them, as one held a penetrative gaze that gave him unprecedented danger, causing him to instantly release the portion of will be left behind as he calmly analyzed everything. His enemies this time were truly not small. They moved with power and precision as they stood like a blade above his head, waiting to cleave down. He could feel his reified source of oraculum urging him on, at this very moment, within the aeonic annals of extremity. His reified Weldian source of oraculum was gazing at unrecorded histories of what was to come as it had always been. While gazing at a particular unrecorded history at this juncture, the light of Lotra began to shine within the eyes of Oraculum as he found yet another target of plundering. Chapter 2637, Heavenly Quintessential Hyperversal Emperor, 1. Noah's reified Weldian source of Oraculum was a nexus of countless waves of information and ideas that constantly flowed in. He viewed a great deal of possible futures, and even recorded histories to learn more about the current reality and the enemies he came across. And he eventually came across unrecorded histories that granted him extremely beneficial knowledge. The unrecorded history he was gazing at this time was a particularly profound one. The process of becoming a part of the 4 hyperversal Heavenly Extremity lineages was a sacred one. While utilizing the Golden Heavenly recommendation granted by Extremity Leda, Noah was allowed to become a part of the Heavenly Animalia Extremity lineage by undergoing a process called Heavenly Blood Ablation. One's old lineage would be burned and vaporized as the blood source of the Heavenly Animalia Extremity lineage would be branded into their very marrows, their being forever becoming a part of the Heavenly lineages. With a Golden Heavenly recommendation, you will be able to undergo Heavenly Blood Ablation with a Golden Heavenly Animalia blood source. Most beings with strong wills survive it, with the results being your lineage fully changed to become a Heavenly Animalia Extremity lineage. As she spoke, Leda walked with Noah across an elevated platform radiating rivers of dissolution. At the very peak of this platform, there was an obsidian crystalline path that led into a circular sea that was the size of a small world. Golden blood source filled with minute traces of Vitalis hyperversal authority could be seen within this enclosed space, a heart-shaking aura releasing from this flowing blood ahead. Enclosed areas of these could be seen stretched out across this space as the others were not as full, with the volume of blood source being very limited. The Golden Heavenly Animalia blood source, although the gains you will make are not going to be as much as Obsidian or Crimson Heavenly Animalia blood, the processes involving those are not things the current you can afford. Heavenly Animalia Extremity lineages have to pay a minimum of 10 Heavenly Notes of Extremity just for the Obsidian Heavenly Animalia blood in order to undergo their second bloodline ablation. Her voice traveled far as the gorgeous stellar landscape of dissolution around them shimmered, Noah's will catching the sight of a massive enclosure of Heavenly Animalia blood source, but this was darker, denser, filled with a shocking amount of possibilities and many more streams of Vitalis hyperversal authority. But to even gain access to it, 10 Heavenly Notes had to be paid. This was equivalent to 100,000 units of Heavenly Aurora. It was something far outside his current scope of power. And yet, when Noah gazed at it from afar, he couldn't help but form a devilish smile. He wondered, if this current reality was a future that was playing out and being watched by his soul in a distant past, would he be able to do something outrageous? The unrecorded history was a unique one. Even Noah's thoughts in this unrecorded history were fantastical ones, as truly his future self thought the same as his past self. His reified Wieldian source of oraculum gazed at the playing unrecorded history as in the next moment, hyperversal plundering. Bzt. A bejeweled, illusory golden hand formed in the skies of the emerging scene. Its target was a unique one, as it domineeringly hovered over the Obsidian Heavenly Animalia blood source that Extremity Leda and Noah could only gaze at from a distance. You are attempting to plunder an unrecorded history. The authorities involved are at a high enough tier. The target of plundering is at a manageable tier. The glorious golden hand came down as its fingers pinched. The history of the obsidian heavenly animalia blood source trembled as moments after, the brilliant light cascaded all around as Noah's soul values were squeezed out along with seas of quintessential hyperversal mana values. But the end result was a mighty one. You have succeeded in plundering the obsidian heavenly animalia blood source C. A singularity of wonder emerged as a vast obsidian sea was transported towards his vaults of quintessence. Around them, the concentration of the authority of dissolution only became heavier as they passed multiple gorgeous floating archipelagos. Each of them were golden heavenly archipelagos, as after a few hours of Noah getting a view of the vastness of the supernal haven of dissolution, they were finally arriving at their target, as ahead of them, a floating island more massive than any of the ones observed beforehand, bloomed. It was no longer the size of a plane, as the light years it extended all around were enough to make it a minor haven. Drizzling, gorgeous black waterfalls of emerge fell from its edges and dripped down as above it. A massive singularity, spinning and collecting vitalist, hyperversal authority while mixing it with potent authority of dissolution to produce even grander, heavenly treasures could be seen. The first obsidian heavenly archipelago after the clusters of golden heavenly archipelagos in this region. It is a center point of power, as here we can find a branch of the heavenly vaults of extremity. The obsidian Sauritian heavenly archipelago. The obsidian Sauritian heavenly archipelago. One couldn't see an array of vessels or guards surrounding it, as there was truly no need to. It was still one of the most protected domains because at this very moment, one could feel an overwhelming and silent aura of a hyperversal extremity spread out constantly around the obsidian heavenly archipelago. Its might and grandeur was not something a Tier 3 hyperversal extremity could release. Seeing Noah's eyes, Extremity Leda smiled as they entered the area of effect of the spread-out will and landed on the floating landmass that looked like a paradisical domain filled with an array of vegetation and tall rising structures pulsing with dissolution. Oh yes, the obsidian Sauritian heavenly archipelago is overseen by a heavenly Sauritian Lord Commander. Their presence here is not just for the monitoring of heavenly treasures that only those of the 4 hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages are allowed to obtain, but truly here for the branch of the heavenly vaults of extremity. They are a personage that has undergone heavenly awakening. Bway! The explosive words were heavy ones to hear as they arrived at a shocking location. Chapter 2638, Heavenly Quintessential Hyperversal Emperor. 2. Even with the dangerous words that relayed the identity of the extremely powerful being overseeing this location, Noah's heart didn't steer as he maintained his sense of calm. Even he couldn't yet fully grasp the extent of power a Tier 4 hyperversal extremity held, when existences, such as the Adjudicator of Dissolution at the Zenith Tier 3 level, were already so unbelievably powerful. Their means and power were approaching the peak of power of the Nether Havens of Extremity and the Supernal Havens of Extremity, from all the information Noah had collected so far. And yet, even while stepping into a domain that had the eyes of such an entity covering everything, he didn't worry. His confidence didn't stem from the quintessential absolute oraculum dynamis of extremity being able to cover him, but his innate vacuous hyperversal meridians and his innate vitalist hyperversal meridians, their product of him becoming an absolute hyperversal inscrutable existence. Who else had survived millions of cycles of death until their soul accepted both the awakenings of vacuous and vitalist hyperversal authority? The only sliver of worry Noah held came to other existences who had undergone Vitalis awakening. Would he or they be able to recognize like existences? Even this, he was only being more cautious as his eyes swept across the obsidian Sauritian heavenly archipelago he had arrived in. Here, he could see many more variations of the heavenly animalia extremity lineages, as keeping in line with the specific lineage of the Tier 4 hyperversal extremity. Keeping watch in this region, there were many Sauritians here in addition to Smilodons, Titanoboas, dragonflies, and a few other heavenly lineages. Many heavenly lineages converge in this archipelago for business and pleasure, and we'll likely see more underdwellers converging here as they get acclimated to the supernal haven of dissolution. The more prominent ones can fight for recognition to become part of the 4 hyperversal heavenly extremity lineages, or make deals with the Havenly beasts here for what they want. Though the cost of Havenly Aurora they will have to pay will be high. The reality around them constantly changed as Leda utilized her hyperversal extremity authority to quickly take them through the periphery of the Havenly archipelago as they entered its depths. They only came to a stop in front of a massive structure built with reinforced black metals radiating dissolution. A massive dome covering this architectural wonder, as huge double doors were open with a few Havenly beasts entering in and out constantly. Most were at the apex aeonic lifeform level, as some adorned humanoid forms, while others kept their bestial forms. The building ahead of them that rose up to be as vast as a large world held the label Havenly Bloodline Ablation Center. Extremity Leda pulled Noah into such a grand building as the moment they crossed the double doors, the reality around them changed as they entered an area that held floating 81 kiosks that looked like vibrant singularities, the auras of 36 Tier 1 hyperversal extremities being behind 36 of these kiosks, as the other 45 were occupied by top-tier apex aeonic lifeforms. Some Havenly beasts were already in front of these kiosks discussing their own matters, as Leda went towards one of the 36 kiosks occupied by a Tier 1 hyperversal extremity with a smile. Little Sister Ruby, the benefits of working for the Havenly Vaults of Extremity must really be enticing for you to still be working here after all these years. Her figure morphed to a gorgeous humanoid form, as the visage behind the kiosk she addressed was an utterly stunning woman with light crimson hair, an air of power and authority wrapping around her as her blessed chest threatened to spill out of the black robe, extremity relic she wore. Gorgeous freckles covered her face as she smiled with an annoyed expression while replying. "Big Sister Leda, are you here on business or pleasure?" "Bah! Business! Here's a golden Havenly recommendation for my young friend behind me." Leda waved her hands to pull out a scroll of golden light that Extremity Ruby accepted, nodding and causing it to disappear in her hands as she turned towards Noah with a professional smile. "A recommendation that grants you the right to utilize a golden Havenly Animalia Blood Source C to undergo the Havenly Blood Ablation for free. If my friend here has yet to tell you, it is a process that entirely replaces your current bloodline and replaces it with the Havenly Animalia Extremity lineage. There are minimal risks associated with it, but do you wish to proceed?" The employee of the Havenly Vaults of Extremity spoke towards Noah calmly as he nodded. A process that would erase his current lineage? Noah smiled at such a thought. Would quintessence truly allow for it to be burned out of existence? A grand question whose answer would be revealed soon enough. With Noah's agreement, a black portal soon formed beside the floating kiosk they were standing in front of, Extremity Ruby pointing towards it and voicing out with a smile, "Name?" Noah raised his brows at this as the extremity before him continued calmly. "Your identity is entirely protected and assured by the authority of the Havenly Vaults of Extremity. Even a Tier 4 hyperversal extremity cannot forcefully attain your information without your permission. You can also use a pseudonym you wish to go by instead." Her words were serene as Noah's bright eyes smiled while replying. "A pseudonym it is then. Indefatigable." "Wah! Indefatigable." The word raised the brows of the two extremities here, as Leda laughed lightly. But Extremity Ruby materialized a feathered pen that pulsed with the authority of the Aeonic Annals of Extremity as she began to write down. "It shall be recorded that Extremity Leda of the Havenly Smilodon lineage was the backer for the entity with the pseudonym Indefatigable. Any grand achievement he attains in the future, or any large transactions through the Havenly Vaults of Extremity, will generate proceeds to Extremity Leda, and if significant enough, even towards the Havenly Smilodon lineage. The reason for someone at Extremity Leda's caliber, or even the other extremities, who wanted to have Noah join their factions after they saw his actions with Havenly authority. If he turned out to be a major player in the future, they would benefit greatly from it." After recording this down, Extremity Ruby smiled and nodded towards Noah while pointing to the obsidian portal beside her. "I wish you success and offer you congratulations in advance for joining one of the 4 hyperversal Havenly Extremity lineages." Her status as an employee of the Havenly Vaults of Extremity trumped everything else as this existence led with cordiality. Extremity Leda shaking her head at this while pulling Noah along, her head turning back briefly towards her friend. Tell me what new benefits they added for you guys working here. I may just join you for the next few years. At this, Extremity Ruby only smiled and nodded. Noah and Extremity Leda disappeared past the portal and appeared in a brand new location where the auras of Tier 2 and 3 hyperversal extremities were abundant. Rivers of dissolution flowed as around them. The earth was raised into small mountains that acted like roads leading to pools of viscous golden light. Some were fully filled, while others were half or barely filled, with streams of dissolution slowly being gathered into these pools, as minute traces of Vitalis hyperversal authority were also attracted into it. The level they were in showed many golden Havenly Animalia blood source seas, as just like Noah had seen in the unrecorded history, events began to play out with little variation as Leda talked about the blood source seas, up until the scene of them walking up one of the elevated mountainous platforms that had a gold sea in front of them. The scene of the obsidian Havenly Animalia blood source sea in the distance that Noah had plundered in an unrecorded history faded from his sight. All right, I've taken you as far as I can. I don't expect you to fail, but take a dip in the golden Havenly Animalia blood source sea. When you come out, you will have been purged of all your lesser bloodlines, as your marrows will course with a hyperversal Havenly extremity lineage, granting you a profound edge over others in your path to extremity. Chapter 2639, Havenly Quintessential Hyperversal Emperor. The third. The purging of all of his lesser bloodlines, as his bone marrows themselves, would produce the makeup of the Havenly Animalia extremity lineage thereafter. These were the words of Extremity Leda, as well as the expectation for how all of the processes of Havenly bloodline ablation went. Standing on the precipice of the mountainous platforms, a smile became etched on the face of Extremity Leda as she spoke teasingly while seeing Noah's calm gaze. Haha, are you getting a little sentimental to say goodbye to your old bloodlines? Don't look at this as losing something, but instead as a process of gaining something much, much grander. As she spoke, she bent down and dipped her fair fingers into the edges of the golden Havenly Animalia blood source in front of them, as she spoke with remembrance. I've undergone the second advancement of the Havenly Animalia bloodline ablation that utilized the obsidian Havenly Animalia blood source. Just having this made it so that my rate of progression towards extremity was increased by 1,000%. The success rate of converging absolute dynamis of extremity more than doubled, along with many more minute boosts to my existence all around. But the most astonishing boon for having one of the 4 hyperversal Havenly extremity lineages is the fact that in your blood, you will now have Havenly authority flowing through you. One would have Vitalis hyperversal authority flowing within their blood. All the existences of the 4 hyperversal Havenly extremity lineages held traces of Vitalis hyperversal authority flowing within them, the concentrations greatly differing, as it would truly only be significant enough if they underwent a second bloodline advancement with obsidian Havenly Animalia blood source. So do not despair in losing something you hold dear. Know that after this, with Havenly authority running through your veins, your chances of undergoing a Havenly awakening will go from 0% to a numerical value that at the very least gives you a chance. Of course, one of your goals should be what my goal is currently: to collect enough units of Havenly Aurora to undergo a third bloodline advancement with Crimson Havenly Animalia blood source. A measly 5 million units of Havenly Aurora, or the equivalent of 500 Havenly notes of extremity. She shook her head as she spoke of this and pulled her fingers out. Her eyes nudged Noah as his lips curved into a silent smile, his now humanoid figure losing the loose obsidian shirt as his chest was laid bare. The gorgeously sculpted shoulders, pectoral muscles, and abdominal muscles seemed like the layering of celestial metal fibers, as half of his body soon became covered with the blaringly stellar golden liquid. He went deeper into the golden Havenly Animalia blood source sea, as tendrils of viscous golden liquid began to rise and react with his body as if they were tendrils of lightning, his figure giving off a grand feel of an ancient entity, as the golden sea around him soon began to churn and swirl with him at the very center, even more tendrils beginning to form and surge towards him as they sought access into his body. The process of the Havenly bloodline ablation was about to begin, and yet as his reified Weldian source of indefatigable was taking a dip in a golden Havenly Animalia blood source sea, his main body in the infinite hyperversal haven was doing something else entirely. His main body had briefly taken an existence from the council that was meeting to design a deadly virus for hyperversal extremities, his figure currently standing around a gorgeous obsidian region that had spinning obsidian cosmos filled with the authority of dissolution all around him. It was the newly enacted Dissolution Alithian Haven that was still being built even now, as at the center of his proliferating haven, Noah waved his hands to take out the obsidian Havenly Animalia blood source sea he had plundered from an unrecorded history. It came out into the open as it was vast, the much greater concentrations of Vitalis hyperversal authority within it, making Noah's body begin to buzz, as he could also feel a dense concentration of dissolution, along with a trace amount of the authority of the 6 other supernal havens of extremity. The change that makes Havli lineages intricately connected to the supernal havens of extremity. Noah spoke with a smile as his body descended into the center of the obsidian Havenly Animalia blood source sea. Its calmness instantly interrupted as it began to seethe. At this very same moment, in the golden Havenly Animalia blood source sea far away, the tendrils of golden viscous liquid surged into his reified Wieldian source of indefatigable as a moment after. This liquid traversed across the bounds of space and time through the connection Noah shared with his reified Weldian source of indefatigable, as streams of gold began to appear in his main body. They appeared at the same time as the stellar obsidian gold liquid he had plundered also began to pierce into his body and seek the origin of his blood. It was like tendrils of flames coursing through him as wondrously he was undergoing both the first bloodline advancement and second bloodline advancement of the Havenly Animalia extremity lineage at the same time. A pristine and highly potent bloodline source is entering your aspects of existence. It didn't just enter his body. It also thought to proliferate into his origin and soul as they were part of and boosted by his bloodline. And the gold of the bloodline source in all this. The potent bloodline source burns with a profound authority as it seeks to scorch and erase the records of your current bloodlines, while making itself the dominant and only present bloodline within your existence. Havenly bloodline ablation. The process was a serious one, as ablation truly meant erasing everything about one's old lineage. And nobody could truly stop this, as the viscous obsidian Havenly Animalia blood source sea, surging and entering Noah's body at this moment, held something that made such a process possible. It made the obsidian and golden viscous tendrils of liquid spread so quickly within one's body that it was terrifying. It was Vitalis Hyperversal Authority. Chapter 2640. Havenly Quintessential Hyperversal Emperor. A 4. The Vitalis Hyperversal Authority within the Havenly Animalia blood source has entrenched and anchored onto your existence and current lineage. The Havenly Animalia blood source is targeting your quintessential hyperversal emperor lineage. The mixture of the Havenly Animalia blood source, Vitalis Hyperversal Authority, and the authorities of the supernal havens have located records of your lineage as they begin the process of Havenly bloodline ablation. The mixture of 3 different authorities. As Noah monitored the fantastical changes occurring within his body, his mind also blared as his eyes shone with a shocking light at this moment. It was because he was experiencing a phenomenon firsthand that caused millions of computations to bloom in his soul. It was because he experienced the process of a foreign authority, the golden and obsidian Havenly Animalia